Welcome back. So today we'll be talking about Azure Bastion and RDP and SSH without the IP. What does that mean? Let's get right into it. So, what is Azure Bastion? At a very high level, you can think of Azure Bastion as a PaaS service, essentially. So, a PaaS managed service that allows you to RDP and SSH into your virtual machines within your VNets over SSL using their private IP on the VM only. So for your virtual machines, you don't have to associate any public IP address with those virtual machines, and you'll still be able to access them across the public internet in a very secure fashion is what it allows you to do. And all of this occurs through the Azure portal. So it doesn't require you to install like any type of new agents or anything into your virtual machines. It doesn't require any software to be installed on your system that you're using. All you need is a HTML5 compatible browser and access to the Azure portal and access to the resources, the virtual machines, and also access to that Bastion service that you will have to deploy within your network. So this allows you to log into your virtual machines, avoiding public internet IP exposure. So it kind of protects you from port scans. Ordinarily, like if you deploy a new virtual machine and you don't have anything like a VPN or express route or some other way to get to that virtual machine, the only way to get to it would be to actually associate a public IP address to it and then connect to it over 3389 or 22 publicly across the internet. So this Bastion service helps eliminate that risk and give you a more secure way to go. And the other good thing about it is that since it's using SSL or port 443 for the connection, this allows you to integrate and traverse a lot of the existing firewall. So say if you're in some other network, and typically port 3389 and 22 is often blocked at the firewall to not allow you to connect to those ports. But 443 is typically open if you have like internet access in most any type of location. So that's another benefit of it. So you can still get to your systems even if you're on some other network somewhere, but you still need to access your virtual machines. And the other thing, you can also use your SSH keys when logging into your like Linux-based Azure virtual machines. You can use that for authentication, or you can use a username and password. So you have to have both options as far as logging into things. So how does all of this work? So at a very high level, you, the user, up here, you would come in over SSL into the Azure portal down here. And then once you're into the Azure portal, you can then access the Azure Bastion service. So once that's deployed within your network, what happens, the Azure Bastion subnet gets deployed into one of your existing virtual networks, and then the PaaS service will then inject various different resources within that Azure Bastion service. So what those resources are is not really exposed to you as a user. You have no direct control of it. You can't like log in directly into it. You can just consume it. So just keep that in mind. Since it is a fully managed service, it will kind of scale as needed as you get more virtual machines in the network if there's any need to scale up, and as well as high availability for the services is kind of taken care of for you as well. Tied to that region where you deployed it, right? So let's keep those things in mind. And then so you'll connect from the Azure portal into the Azure Bastion service, and that also will deploy have an NSG associated with it to secure that connection and how that works. And the way it works, like you only can access it through the Azure portal. So even though the Azure Bastion service will have a public IP address and will have like a host name associated with it that you could like type that into your browser and hit it directly, but it actually won't work since the way it's secured. It has to have a call coming from the Azure portal, and then that's the only way it will actually work and respond to you as a client coming into it. But once you go in through the Azure Bastion service, then you can just simply kind of click on one of your available virtual machines, provide your preferred way of authenticating, either username and password or SSH key in the case of a Linux machine, and then you're in, and that's all done over on the back end over that private IP addresses that are associated with your virtual machine. So you don't have to, again, you don't have to add any type of public IP to the virtual machines themselves. You don't have to deploy any type of new agent or anything on the virtual machines. It just kind of all just happens relatively seamlessly once you have it deployed. So how can I get started? So here we are, we're on the Azure portal. So once you're on the Azure portal, what you want to do is, depending on how yours look, you want to go and maybe click the three little slashes at the top of your screen and go to all services. And then once you go into all services, you want to type in Bastion to filter it down. And then you want to click on Bastion once it comes up to go into the interface for it. So once that's up, you see here I already have one here. You'll just simply click Add. And that'll take you into the wizard to create a new Bastion service for your environment. So first thing first, you have to select a resource group or create a new one. In this case, I'm going to just select one of my existing one, LTV Azure Lab. Then we have to give the Bastion service a name, or the resource a name. So I'll just try to keep my naming conventions pretty consistent. So LTV Azure Lab, Bastion East US for East US. So the Azure Bastion service is not available in all regions, so just keep that in mind. There's a limited list. So next step would be you either select an existing virtual network and it has to have enough IP address space available for you to inject a new subnet, or you can create a new one. So I would just create a new one in this example. We'll name it East US, LTV Azure Lab East US VNet. And by default, it's going to associate some IP addresses that's not used yet. That's too many IP addresses for my use cases, so I'm not going to use that range. I'm going to go ahead and specify my own range. I'm going to use a /22. That'll give me about 1,024 addresses. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a default subnet. Doesn't have to be named default. That's just a name that I'm using for this example. I'm going to make this a /24. Now, this next subnet, it does have to be named exactly this. It has to be named Azure Bastion subnet. Remember that. It has to be named exactly that. Nothing else will work. So, and then also, I'm going to go ahead and give it an IP address range. So it requires a /27 as a minimum, but I'm going to give mine a /26. But again, just keep that in mind. It has to be at least a /27 for the Azure Bastion subnet in order for it to work. And I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, everything looks good there for me. So the next part, we need to associate a public IP address with the Bastion service. So the Bastion service is what will have the public IP address. And you can use existing IP if you already have one that's not being consumed by another resource, or you can just allow it to give you a new one. We'll give it a name. And then you see it associate public IP address with a standard SKU. In this case, it's going to be a static. You see those options are kind of grayed out, so it forces that for you. So you can associate a tag if you want. I won't for my example. I'm just going to go ahead and say create. We'll get a brief summary of what it's about to create. Everything looks okay. Go ahead and click create. So once you do that, in my case, at least the first time I did it, it took about 5 minutes for the whole thing to actually get deployed. So I don't want to bore you and let you watch here for 5 minutes or however long it takes the time, but it takes roughly about 5 minutes for it to deploy. So we'll let that run through and then we'll be right back. Now I've learned all about Azure Bastion. Now how do I use it? So here we are, we're back on the Azure portal again. And since we have it deployed and up and running and it's all good to go, as mentioned, it takes about 5 minutes for the service to deploy. Now what we want to do is go to virtual machines. So I'll go ahead and click on my virtual machines. And then I want to go and find a VM that's actually on the VNet in the region where I just deployed my Bastion service set. So if I scroll down here, see I actually have 2 VMs that are running. They're both in East US, and they're connected to that Azure Lab East US VNet that we deployed the Bastion service to. See they have private IP addresses, and you can see one is Windows, one is running Windows, and one is running Linux. So I'm going to go ahead and click into my App1 server. and we're going to go and try to connect to it using Bash and see what that experience is like. So once I click on there, up at the top, I want to click connect. That'll expose a few options on the right here. So you see RDP, SSH, and Bastion. So we want to use Bastion. So Bastion does use RDP and SSH, but those buttons for RDP and SSH is to connect to it using like a public IP or some other way like that. So once I click on Bastion, I get prompted for my username and password, or in the case of Linux, I could use a private SSH private key to connect as well. So let's go ahead and log in. Let's go ahead and log in here and see this in action. So I'll go ahead and put my username, go ahead and type my super complicated special characters password. And once I click connect, you see it opens up another browser window by default. And you see I have a host name up there exposed that is connecting to. So that unique name gets created for my service. And you see now I'm in. Just like that, I'm into that virtual machine. I'm logged in through a SSH session. You can see it's a real session. I didn't have to install any software on my system. I don't need like PuTTY or anything like that to be installed locally in my system. See, I can type. It's pretty responsive. I can go and see what, okay, this is the version, and other things there. So looks all good. That's the Linux experience for that. So we'll jump back over and let's hop over to our Windows virtual machine and let's see what that experience looks like. So the process is pretty much the exact same. We'll just go and click our connect button up at the top. We'll see RDP, SSH, and Bastion. We'll go to Bastion and we'll type our username and password. So same process. Make sure I get my password right and say connect. That'll go out and try to connect to my VM. So there we go. Now like we're loading up. It's logging me in. I'll be presented with my desktop. You can see already my mouse is moving, and it's ready to go. So it's pretty seamless once you have it going. No public IP address required as far as my VMs. So I keep my VM secured and not exposed to internet. My Bastion host is exposed, or whatever that service is exposed, but the only way to access it is through the Azure portal. You can go and hit that URL directly and it actually won't work. So one thing I want to point out is that it does support like copy and pasting of text. So you saw that little icon on the left that I just clicked there. You can paste in text and then it'll be available in the clipboard within the VM. And that works on Linux and Windows as well. That you'll see that little button on the side in each case. So that's how that works. So how much is all this going to cost me? Is it free? So no, Azure Bastion is not a free service. So it does have a cost associated with it. So the price does vary from region to region a little bit. But in my case, I'm using the Azure East region. And the service, in addition, the service is not available in all regions today. There are some regions where it's not available. But in a nutshell, it costs about 9.5 cents per hour while you have the service running. So once you spin up the Azure Bastion service, you can't stop it, right? You can delete the service, but once it's on, that 9.5 cent per hour charge starts. So just keep that in mind, and it is per VNet. So if you have a whole bunch of different VNets and you're going to use the Azure Bastion service, you will need to, at least today, with the feature set that's available, you would have to deploy an Azure Bastion service into each one of those VNets in order to get the capability to connect in without exposing public IP addresses, like without having a VPN, without having like express route circuit connecting back to your virtual machines. So you have that base price of about 9.5 cents per hour, and then there is an outbound data transfer charge. So your first 5 gigabyte of that is free. And then after that, then there's a kind of a a gradual decrease in price as more outbound traffic that you're sending through the service accumulates. So I hope this has been useful for someone out there, and I'll see you in the next one.